unmute myself, and we're going to unmute Mary. And I think we're all set up. It is a real pleasure to introduce former copy editor for The New Yorker, now its regularly contributing comma queen, Mary Norris. She was a query proofreader for 24 years. Mary started the magazine in 1978. Her 2015 book, Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen, was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, the Wall Street Journal, and plenty of other places. And it was nominated for the Thurber Prize for American Humor. Her latest book, now out in paperback, Greek to Me, Adventures of the Comma Queen, has been called True Ambrosia. You know, writing these introductions, I see a lot of book world blurbs and reviews and praise, but one of the things I came across with this book just rings so true about Greek to me, and I wanted to share it with you. In the New York Times book review, Vivian Gornick said that Greek to Me is, quote, one of the most satisfying accounts of a great passion that I have ever read. And I think that's just a perfect introduction to the book. Greek to Me, it veers from skinny dipping not far from Patrick Leigh Farmer's Beach to Greek theater performances in the actual classical language to asides about The Simpsons and Animal House and the history of manuscripts. It's an absolute delight. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Mary Norris.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for coming here. I'm getting a little bit of the fantasy, I guess, that I'm in Vermont, which would be so nice because I was sorry not to get to go to Booktopia. And what I can tell you about my book, Greek to Me, is that I began the book. I only got to write a book about Greek after I wrote a book about English. I started studying Greek back in the 80s while I was at the New Yorker after seeing the movie Time Bandits. I don't know if you remember that movie, but there's a scene where Sean Connery plays Agamemnon. And I thought that the scenery, in the scene he's battling a minotaur on the plain in ancient Greece. And I thought the scenery was the most beautiful landscape I'd ever seen. It was very elemental, just sky and earth, no grass, nothing green, just rocks. And I wanted to go there. That is a bit of a naive response to art, but it's all I've got. So I went to work the next day and told my boss in the department I was working then called collating, his name was Ed Stringham, that I wanted to go to Greece. And he'd been there himself many times. So he got very excited and went right to the map and showed me where he'd been. And then he pulled a book out of his shelf that was called A Modern Greek Reader for Beginners. And he started translating from it, pronouncing it and translating it. And although I had just decided to go to Greece, it had not yet occurred to me that I might be able to learn Greek. So I got very excited about that. And I started taking a course. And the New Yorker had this enlightened policy at the time where they paid for employees to take some kind of course that had a bearing on their work. And so they paid for that. I went to Greece. I learned enough modern Greek to buy a ticket for a ferry and get a hotel room and eat lots of wonderful Greek food. And then I went on ferries, and it was on a ferry in the Aegean that I fell totally in love and decided that when I got back, I would study ancient Greek so that I would know all these Greeks better, so that I would have the history as well as the present. And when I came back, I switched to ancient Greek. And when I submitted the bill, well, now I was studying at Columbia University, so when I submitted the bill to the New Yorker, the answer was no, that they were not going. They didn't think ancient Greek was relevant to my job. By then I was working on the copy desk. Now we all are enlightened people, and we know that anything about language is relevant to a job on a copy desk, right? So I started keeping notes on Greek words or Greek-derived words that entered the magazine. For instance, ophthalmologist, which is spelled OPHTHALMOLOGIST. And a lot of people leave out that extra H at the beginning. But I had just learned in Greek class that the Greek word for eye is ophthalmos. and that sort of thing. Even the word pie is the one that's most familiar to Americans and people who speak English who think they don't know any Greek, but there is a lot of Greek embedded in English. So anyway, years later, when it was time for me to write a second book after my book about English grammar, my editor said, "Would you like to write about a book about Greek?" And of course, I was excited about Greek when I first started studying it, both ancient and modern, and I would have liked to have written a book back then. In fact, I did write a lot of travel pieces, none of which were ever published, but I had everything. I'd saved everything, every note I ever took, every piece I wrote. I had two big boxes. One was full of modern Greek, and the other was labeled Greek drama. So I got those out, and it was not easy. I'm neither, right at this point, I'm not fluent in modern Greek, and I'm not a classicist. I don't have a degree in ancient Greek. I've never studied Latin. And so the one worry, my main worry about this book, Greek to Me, the title came to me instantly, was that it wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to have enough modern Greek to satisfy Greeks, and it wasn't going to have enough of a knowledge of ancient Greek to satisfy classicists. So there would be something in this book to disappoint everyone. But I was saved by the title, Greek to Me. I decided it's just going to be a book about what I know about Greek, and that I wouldn't have to apologize for that. So that's how the book came about. And it has just about everything I know about Greek in it.
That is lovely. Thank you so much. One of the things that I really loved about Greek to Me were how you treat these, and I think it follows from what you were saying, these sort of familiar topics like the alphabet or Greek mythology, but then you combine those with threads of memoir, of travel, of your deep knowledge that's really lightly worn, as I think we all just saw. And then how all of this contributes to make these topics, which might seem sort of initially familiar, really fresh and interesting. So, for instance, like your first chapter, it's about the alphabet. Can you speak briefly about how the Phoenician letters became the Greek letters that then became our letters?
Well, I was determined that the first chapter had to be about the alphabet because I had this high hope that people could learn the Greek alphabet from reading my book. And my editor kept saying, "You're not going to teach anyone the Greek alphabet." And it's, in fact, that chapter on the alphabet was possibly the hardest one to write because, the Greek alphabet, it's a thing of great beauty, but it's kind of static. You have to get stories about the alphabet, and you certainly can't start at alpha and go through every letter to omega without putting people totally to sleep. I even got bored myself. I love the alphabet, but around lambda, I thought this is not going to work. So I mixed it up. I wrote about the fraternity system, which comes from Phi Beta Kappa. The first person to start a Greek fraternity was at William and Mary College, and he had not been admitted to a Latin study group. And to get revenge, he started a Greek study group, and he called it Phi Beta Kappa, which means philosophy is the life of, or knowledge is the life of love of philosophy. It's in the book. I've kind of forgotten what it meant, but oh, that's very nice. Thank you. Anyway, then that's why I got to write about Animal House once I got started on fraternities, and I decided I would skip just to the letters that people don't know, which are Chi, Phi, and Psi, which I have not spoken in the right order. I guess the order is Phi, Chi, and Psi. That's the PS that we get our word psychology from. Chi looks like an X in Greek, and that's the first letter in chaos, chaos. usually transliterated as CH or K, or even sometimes H or KH. But it's you can get completely lost in it. The vowels are what the Greeks added to make it. I mean, wonderful that the Phoenicians invented the alphabet, but we don't have a lot of Phoenician literature because I think it's partly because they couldn't make the alphabet sing. It took those vowels to really make the alphabet work as an instrument of poetry and prose.
Speaking of the musicality aspect of it, what was it like performing in ancient Greek in New York?
Well, this was, the way this came about was when I started studying ancient Greek. It was the first time I'd ever studied a dead language. And I missed all those games you play when you study a living language. In French, you do skits, you have dialogues, you eat the food of the culture. And I missed that, although of course I could eat Greek food. But I saw a sign on campus that was for auditions for Euripides' Electra in ancient Greek. I thought, that would do it. That would be as close as I can come to a conversation class in ancient Greek. So I tried out, and of course they were desperate and gave me a part in the chorus because I could hold a note, and I had some rhythm. So nothing much else was required. You didn't have to have a great singing voice or really be able to dance. Didn't have to be a chorus girl. So that was a wonderful experience. It's not easy because I came out of modern Greek, and modern Greek pronunciation is phonetic. Once you learn the values of the vowels and the consonants, you just have to know where to put the accent, to put the stress in the word. Not that that itself is easy, but the pronunciation of ancient Greek it's unknown. Scholars have done research and they've made up values and assigned values to the vowels. Erasmus is the one who is mostly responsible back at the beginning of the Renaissance for devising the sounds of the Greek words. But if you have recently studied modern Greek, it just sounds ridiculous to you. But they do have some nice things like oi moi and talaina. There are a lot of words for wretched in ancient Greek. So I got to be in the chorus, and my dream came true, the dream of every actress. I got plucked from the chorus, and the next year I was cast as the lead in the Trojan Women. That's Hecuba. And I got the lead partly because I was ancient. They were all undergraduates, and I was 34. So I got to play the lead of Hecuba. And let's see, what was hard about that? Again, it's the real feat of memory more than anything else. Getting those lines down. Hecuba has 8 really long speeches. And I corresponded briefly with Katharine Hepburn to get her advice because I found out she had played Hecuba in a movie of the Trojan Women. I didn't dare watch it because there would be, it would be a disaster if I tried to imitate Katharine Hepburn's Hecuba. But I wanted to know if there were any tricks when somebody starts out so sad as Hecuba is and only gets sadder and sadder and sadder. And I wrote, how you do that? Is there any way I could play it for laughs? And she wrote back and she said, by all means, play it for laughs, especially Hecuba. It's the only way. And so I was very pleased during the performance to get one laugh one night on the line. I don't remember the Greek for it, but it was in the Hecuba's speech to Helen, when Helen has protested that she didn't want to come. It was Paris's fault that she was ravaged and taken away. And Hecuba says to her, "Who among Spartans heard you scream?" So somebody in the audience actually understood the Greek of that and laughed, and I felt like, take me now. But the only thing I have left to say about that experience is, Greek tragedy is supposed to be cathartic. It's supposed to like purge you, make you feel clean. And I used up all the bad stuff in my system on stage playing that role. And for days afterward, I felt completely cleaned out. It was a wonderful sensation.
That's really reminiscent of the sort of the etymology of catharsis too. I think it's that sense of purgation. One thing that what you just mentioned sort of suggests to me is having been fluent in modern Greek and sort of knowing your way enough around classical Greek. How big is the difference for people that might not know? Can you compare it to, say, Chaucerian English and modern English? I mean, how far are they apart or different?
Well, it's more like Anglo-Saxon and English, or at least Old English and modern English. There are a lot of words that look the same and have the same spelling. They're pronounced differently, and often the meaning will have shifted in some sneaky way. So that I once went, speaking of these Greek plays, there was a plan at one point to try to take one of our plays at Columbia to Greece, to a theater festival there. And I wrote a letter to them, supposedly in modern Greek. And I was trying to say, we want to bring our play to Greece. We would like to bring our version of I think it was The Clouds, to Greece. And instead of saying we would like to, it came out, there was just enough of an overlap into ancient Greek, because I started getting them very confused, so that what I was saying was, we would be willing to bring our show to you. So modern Greeks do not like having ancient Greek pressed on them by tourists. It's I think I can say that pretty surely. But otherwise, the words look a lot the same. Modern Greek has a lot more Turkish in it because modern Greece, or not modern Greece, but Greece was under the Ottoman Turks for so many years, for like 400 years. So of course the language was influenced by that.
I think that's a good segue into my next question, or one of my next questions, which is, what exactly is going to happen to the Parthenon Marbles with Brexit? You weighed in a few times. You had a piece in the New Yorker, it's back in November, I believe, about it. What's going on now? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on now. I think everybody is a bit distracted right now by the pandemic. And in Greece, they also have the refugee camps, and, for the virus, if that makes it into those refugee camps, it's just going to be a huge problem, and nobody's going to be thinking much about the Parthenon Marbles for a while, I think. But they may have been, it felt like they were making some progress for a while. It felt like Brexit would be a good opportunity to get a fresh start. Well, you can't get a fresh start, but to open a new dialogue directly between Greece and Britain without the European Union getting all mixed up in it, or just to make friends. The British Museum does not seem inclined ever to let them go, and of course their attitude is that they save them, and also that more people see them because they're in the British Museum than would see them if they were still in Greece. And if they had remained in Greece, there would be nothing left of them because of the pollution and the Turks. So it's as much of a stalemate, I'm afraid, as ever, with the exception that a lot of people are coming out in favor of Greece. Did you see, that's what inspired that piece I wrote for the New Yorker, was that the Chinese premier had said that he thought they should return the marbles, that British should return the marbles to Greece. But then, he doesn't have a very good record either. So it's a little hard to take the side of the Chinese in this.
As you pointed out, he said it in Greece too, and not in England.
Yes.
Right.
I can add to this that I was I was invited to the Hay Festival in Wales last year, just about this time last year, and it was the first time on British soil that I was asked how I felt about the Parthenon Marbles. And I had to be, the woman who was letting me stay at her house had said in the car on the way there, well, it's better than having the Turks use them for target practice. So I thought, oh, I'm going to insult my host. What am I going to do? So I had to be very tactful. And I said that I thought that, and I come to this conclusion in the book too, that we needed to accept that those things had been fragmented and spread out all over the world, and that they belonged to civilization and to all of us. But I was so mealy-mouthed that Greeks in the audience got mad at me. And so I will never try to be tactful again. Return the marbles.
One other element, and I think this was reminded me by my colleague Rachel's teak mug that we were looking at earlier. You make a great case for Athena being a feminist icon. Why?
Oh, well, women need, or girls certainly, and women need some kind of role model growing up. And maybe, lots of girls have powerful mothers and independent mothers. My mother was under the thumb of my father always. And I'm sure it's one of the reasons I never married, was that I thought I would be subsumed by a husband. So, and my other model in those days was nuns. And I thought I would make a terrific nun. I thought I would have been really popular in the convent. But I really wanted to change my name too. I was going to change my name to honor St. Paul McCartney. That was my idea. I thought I could call myself Sister Mary St. Paul, and nobody would know that I was really in a devotee of Paul McCartney, not of the Apostle Paul. But it was not until I got to the New Yorker that I started seeing women in work roles, I guess, who were brilliant at jobs they did, and who were writers and proofreaders, and some of them had families and some of them didn't. And then, that I'd always, ever since I could remember, almost as if it was part of the culture. I don't remember reading the Odyssey. I went to the movie Ulysses at the Lyceum Theater back in the early 60s. So I knew I liked Odysseus, and I knew that Athena favored Odysseus, and I wanted Athena to favor me. And at the same time, I wanted to be like Athena. It was kind of mixed up like that. But I started to think about what qualities Athena has. And she has a very pure relationship with Zeus, with her father. Her mother was not in the picture. Her mother was Metis, who was one of the Titans and was not around. Oh, Zeus ate her. That's right. Now I remember. And Athena was born from Zeus's head. So Athena didn't have anyone. She didn't have that woman at home that she had to rebel against when she was little. So that she didn't have that rebelliousness shaping her. Not that she isn't rebellious, but Zeus respects her and follows her advice sometimes, and she's the goddess of war and of wisdom. So she'll try diplomacy before she'll use a sword, but she's pretty good with a sword too, if it comes to that. And she gave the Greeks knowledge of the olive. The famous myth is that when Athens, named for Athena, it wasn't exactly up for grabs, but they needed a patron, and Poseidon, his gift was to have a salt spring arise on the Acropolis, and Athena's was to plant an olive tree, and the gods thought the olive was the greater gift, so they awarded the city to Athena. And when you think about it, it's not just an olive tree. An olive it comes with all the culture of knowing how to take care of the tree. Olives live, I can't say forever, but they spring back. If they're hacked way down, the shoots will come back up. And the olive, you can't, it would be a useless fruit unless you knew how to cultivate it and how to put it in brine and soften it and make it food and press the oil from it and use that oil for everything from hair conditioner to lamp lighting to salad oil. So it's like, to me, it feels like that's the essence of the earth and some expression of the earth, and that it's a way of using your resources wisely. And that's another of the things that I think Athena has to teach us. That and her independence really impressed me and made me feel like, well, if I could be like Athena, or if I could aspire at least to be strong and educated and have, try to gain some wisdom, then that she would be my model.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to open it up in case anyone has any questions. Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat bar. As you're doing that, I think I've got one last question for you, Mary, which is, could you take us through sort of the life of an article at the New Yorker, from when it leaves, say, a writer's hands to when it gets published in the magazine? So that side part.
Oh, that's fine. If nobody has any questions, we can talk about that for a half hour.
We'll start with that, and then we'll see what questions come up.
All right. Well, there is something there at the New Yorker that was called the flow chart, which we used to consult. Well, just, when people were new and they wanted to know how an article goes through, there'd be this flow chart, just like a ladder. The editor, when I started, was William Shawn. So a piece would be in a manuscript. Say the author was John McPhee. John McPhee would have told William Shawn, well, I'd like to write a piece about oranges, or one of the early pieces that John McPhee did. And Mr. Shawn, we always called him Mr. Shawn, he would think it over and he would have a response, and then John McPhee would go and write the piece and bring it back, and then William Shawn would accept the piece and he would assign it to an editor to work directly with McPhee. So they'd get together and get it into some kind, the editor would no doubt have opinions about how it was too long. Usually that was a complaint with John McPhee, too much detail about all the different kinds of oranges. So John McPhee would have to think that over and decide, well, I guess they're right, or he would fight for something that he wanted, but we didn't know that. When I was on the copy desk, we on the copy desk were the first ones to see the piece besides the author and the editor. The manuscript would come through and, just on a typewriter. This was really the old days. And the copy editor would look at it, and it was just our job was to be a sieve for the prose, not to change anything, just to employ the serial comma and the two dots, the diaresis over a word like the second O in cooperate, which readers still complain about, but it is New Yorker style and nobody has come up with a better solution for certain words. So we'd spell words the way the New Yorker spelled words, like traveled with two L's, say vendor with an ER at the end instead of an OR, some of those idiosyncrasies. So then after the copy desk was finished with it, it would go to what we call the makeup department, which is production at other places. It doesn't have anything to do with cosmetics. But in those days, it was men. They were all men, just counting the picas and fitting it. That was the art department. That was all, they would put cartoons in it, and there was an art director, but there was no fancy design department as there is now at every magazine. So then it would come back in galley form, right? That's when it's just put into type, but not designed for a page. And at that point, it was read, if it was nonfiction, it was read by a woman named Eleanor Gould, who was a genius, and she made many suggestions. Her proofs were always just really full. You know, I always felt sorry for the writers because they'd done their best, and then they discover that it could be vastly improved what they did, and they had to rethink everything they'd done. So if it was nonfiction, Eleanor would read it. If it was fiction, a different proofreader, Lou Burke, would read it. Eleanor was a genius, and she improved a pedestrian writer, but on a genius writer, you know, her own kind, she could be a bit of a dead hand. Whereas Lou Burke always had great respect for the voice of the writer, and so she would let the writer say what the writer had to say. The famous thing that Lou Burke said once was, first we get the pebbles out, then we get the sand out, and the writer's voice rises. No harm done. That was the idea, not to harm it, just to make the writer as much of that writer as the writer could be. And then after it was in galley, once the piece was chosen, was selected for an issue, was scheduled to go into the magazine, then all kinds of hands went to work at it. The fact checker, two proofreaders, one of whom was called the okayer, and the editor and the author and the libel lawyer and the editor-in-chief would often read it again. And that's when this department called collating came in, because the editor would get all these proofs from different sources and mark up which changes he wanted. And then it went back to the collator. The collator would put all those selected changes onto a clean proof for the printer, and then that would go to the makeup department again and come back the next day in the format of the page proof. And then it would all happen again. But at the end of that process, there would be a meeting with the okayer, the author, the editor, the checker, and they would have all read the piece and come with their suggestions on paper for discussion. And it was the okayer's job, and that was my job, also called a query proofreader, to act as recording secretary and write down all the accepted changes and have them, toward the end with word processors, the okayers did it ourselves. We would enter the changes. That way we knew we were in control of it. And then the piece would go to makeup again, and it would come back yet again for a foundry proofreader to check the new proof against the old proof and make sure no mistakes had been introduced. So, 36 pairs of eyes at least on each of those articles.
Thank you, Linda. We have one follow-up question to that, and then I want to give it on to someone who will appear on video. Joey Lowe says, how has that process changed today?
Yes, because of the introduction of the word processor, they did it very carefully, very intelligently. The word processor was replaced the collating department, basically. So the typing pool and the collating department were condensed. They kept the okayer. There are still meetings, okaying meetings, sometimes, but not always. Some editors just prefer to put all the changes on themselves and to deal with the author directly themselves. And so, you're not dealing with people, you're just getting the piece back. And, the editors, it turned out, the okayers were very suspicious. Oh, they'll never do a good job. But they're very meticulous, and they hardly ever introduce a mistake themselves, which is why it works. They still have the thing that is still the same, though, is the foundry department at the end, the foundry reading at the end. That word foundry proofreader comes from when they had proofreaders right in the printing plant, and they would have to cast another letter, foundry, to fix the piece before it went to print.
Thanks, Mary. All right, I'm going to unmute Linda. Linda, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, Mary, I was wondering about what it takes to be a copy editor today, in the fact that it's not unusual for me to read Between You and I, sorry, Have the Wrong Two, which is especially funny for me because I read what is there, not what was intended. So if
Oh.
you, and I have a background. I wrote a column in a medium-sized newspaper for a number of years, and have an infamous story that I won't bore you with, but I made sure I had the right hanger in an article about putting clothes in the closet, and they changed it to what you put airplanes in.
Oh, yeah, those are the hardest times, right? When that is the cardinal sin of a copy editor, of course, is to take something that was correct and make it wrong. One other thing, if somebody is written between you and I, or if somebody has said it out loud and is quoted, do you fix that or not? You know, do you let people see, well, that's the way they talk? Even President Obama, who was so well-spoken, would say, you know, that people have been kind enough to issue invitations to Michelle and and I'd like crawl under the table. Don't be afraid to say me, please. Now we have much worse problems than that. One of the things that comes up that occurs to me to talk about, since you have brought up the difference between when I was learning copy editing and now, is when we worked on paper, we had something concrete to look at. When Eleanor Gould, when one of our resident geniuses was through with the proof and the editor was through, it would go into a big box that we called the junk. And if you were an apprentice, as I was for many years, you could go and lift a pile of proofs out of this box and see what these people had done and learn from them. But now, because everything is on a screen, all of the changes get hidden behind the next version. And it would take an extra layer of devotion to go and look back at what somebody had changed. And that, I don't think, ever happens. I don't think people have enough to do reading without looking to see what it used to be. We had, I think, more downtime in the old days too. There was not a website to feed constantly. Also, when Eleanor Gould died, or when she, what happened was that she had a stroke in the office, and so she didn't ever come back. And she couldn't be replaced. You know, you couldn't hire an Eleanor Gould. So what she did fell to the okayers to split that work up among ourselves. So really then we did not have the kind of downtime we'd had up till then. I guess we had been a little bit spoiled. But the younger people who really want to learn would ask us to save our proofs for them so that they could look at them and learn the way we had learned. So a little of it went forward. At least they knew that was how to do it. But a lot of the tradition was lost because of the computer. Thank you.
That reminds me of something I read in Greek to me earlier today. You were discussing, and I just to chip it in because I thought it was a brilliant observation, was how the codex, the bound book, had a great run, you say, but now we're back to the scroll
Yeah.
screen that the codex replaced. But anyway, moving on back to Greek stuff, we've got a question here, a couple questions regarding mythology, and one of them here is from iPad 5. Do you think colleges should integrate mythology into the general curriculum?
Well, it certainly could be integrated into any curriculum, I think. I think a course in mythology as part of a liberal arts program would be a great thing. Mostly, though, mythology, in all the Greek mythology, you know, there's nobody in those days, I think this is true, made a collection of myths the way that, say, Edith Hamilton or in our day Stephen Fry has done. All of the myths are in Homer. They're in context. They're in the context of a story. So yeah, everybody should read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the tragedies, which are also, you know, when you think of mythology, when I think of mythology, sometimes I think just about the gods, but Oedipus, Electra, Clytemnestra, you know, all of the Trojan heroes who were not necessarily immortals. They're also mythology. They're part of mythology. So it is the reading of the ancients. Oh, Herodotus is so wonderful, and the Peloponnesian War, Thucydides. So also the historians. Yeah, it would be part of a course in world history and in world literature. And you could always draw out the mythology from that.
And then following up with that, Sherry has sent me a question. Going back to Athena, given that you went to Columbia, did you ever have conversations about the role of Athena with the powers of be at Barnard, or which names or numbers of societies and things there are named for her, but for reasons that they assume are the same reasons that you admire Athena?
Well, I should clarify that I went to college at Douglas College, Rutgers University, and I went to graduate school at the University of Vermont. And I studied Greek only as, well, what they had some terrible name for it, like a postgraduate special student. I only took Greek classes as a returning adult at Barnard and Columbia, and then I was in those plays. So I was not part of any of the undergraduate or even the graduate societies. So probably you, Sharon, was it, who asked this question, knows more about those things than I do. I think they do have an Athena Film Festival, or yeah, because I just last fall went to see a version of Antigone that was a film, and that was the first time I saw that this was called the Athena Film Festival. And I wondered, well, how come I never knew about this? It sounds wonderful. The alma mater on the Columbia campus, isn't that Athena? Isn't the goddess of wisdom the perfect patron, I should say, of a school? The University of Athens has this huge, kind of scary because it's in living color, statue of Athena up at the front of the building, and she can be frightening, actually.
All right, there is another question here from Kimberly. What was your biggest hurdle going from being a copy editor to a writer?
Wow, that's a good question. I suppose my biggest, what would be, well, it was getting published. Of course, I came to the New Yorker wanting to write for the New Yorker, and I thought, I had an entry-level job in what was called the editorial library. Took me 3 years to work my way up to this job, putting out the magazine. In the editorial library, we literally took the magazine apart with razor blades and pasted the columns and the cartoons into scrapbooks, individual scrapbooks for the writers, which turned out to be wonderful things. I wish I was confident that those still existed because of the computer. Again, there's no need to make those paper artifacts. So anyway, I tried to write for Talk of the Town, and I had a few pieces published in Talk of the Town, but William Shawn had writers that he had hired to be writers, and having staffers come around with little stories that he hadn't approved, or he had probably pretty inept little stories. But William Shawn at the same time was very open to new talent. So he did publish a few of my pieces. And when he left, I had more things published under Robert Gottlieb. When Tina Brown came, that was kind of it for me. I just had to go back into my foxhole because I was not interested in celebrity culture at all. And my writing is kind of old-fashioned and not hard enough edged for the kind of journalism that Tina promoted. Then David Remnick came, and he turned the magazine into a more newsy thing. But you can hear, I always wanted to write for the magazine. And I wrote a novel while I was working as a proofreader, and I couldn't get it published. And I wrote a memoir, and I also couldn't get that published. But while I was the memoir had just been turned down by an agent, and that's when somebody came to my door. I'd been there, yeah, I'd been trying to get seriously published for years and years. It's, I think, 30 years, and I was already in my 60s. I know I shouldn't reveal my age, but you should know I'm going to be the poster child for the late bloomers. That was when the web had just started up, and somebody who was a young editor on the website asked me if I would write a piece about commas to answer back, to defend us, because a writer named Ben Yagoda had published on the New York Times website an article about commas. It was called Fanfare for the Comma Man. And he had made fun of the New Yorker's close style of punctuation. And somebody had to defend it. And I, at the time, I thought, I've written a novel, I've written a memoir. These are interesting, commas are not. Why do you want me to write about commas? And I didn't want to do it. But then I saw on my desk, I had the comma shaker. This was something that Lou Burke, who I mentioned earlier, had made as a comment on New Yorker style. It was a little canister with perforated top, and she'd covered it with brown paper and written on it, and drawn commas on it. And it was the comma shaker, because Lou also thought the New Yorker used too many commas. And she, the joke was that when the piece was just about ready to go to print, we'd shake the commas onto it, and then it could go to print. So because I had become the holder of the comma shaker, and I'd been copy editing for 30 years and should be assumed to know something about commas, I decided I had to do it, and I thought of a way to do it. And they published that piece on the website, and I hate to use the expression, but it went viral. And then they asked me to write more pieces about New Yorker style, and I wrote about the diaeresis and about pencils too. And those pieces started to kind of clabber. And I went back to the last agent who had rejected my memoir and said, do you think there might be a book in pencils and punctuation? And he, checked off the boxes and said, why, yes. So it took that long. And that is how long it took me to get a book published and to become recognized as a writer instead of a copy editor. I busted out of my pigeonhole in the end.
Nice. Thanks. We've got just a time for about a couple more questions, and there's two here. One's from Linda again. It was asking about if you've read Madeline Miller's books, whom I know blurbed Greek to me, but I think that also spills in easily to one of the things we often do at the physical Booktopia, which is asking our author if there's any books that you want to recommend.
Well, I have read Madeline Miller. In fact, I got to appear last year. It was my first event for publicizing Greek to me in Dallas. I was Madeline Miller and I had to really think hard about what I could say on a program with Madeline Miller, because her book, my book is nonfiction, and it's all about the nuts and bolts of Greek language and mythology. And nuts and bolts of mythology sounds ridiculous, excuse me. But Madeline's book is fantasy and embroiders the mythology. And that's what the conclusion I came to, was that was the difference between us, that Madeline took the myth and embroidered it. And I took real life and tossed it around and cracked it and played with it until I could squeeze mythology out of it. So there are two completely opposite approaches. And I think it's wonderful that people can take something, for instance, it's Circe is one tiny chapter, one episode in the Odyssey, and that mythology is so rich, and that Madeline Miller's imagination is so fertile that she could take that nut and grow a whole book from it. I think that is wonderful. There's another writer, Pat Barker, who wrote The Silence of the Women, and that is another book that takes off from the Iliad, from Achilles. Is it Briseis, or maybe it's Chryseis? I get them mixed up. I think it's Chryseis. Anyway, it's from the point of view of the women who are captured and made the slaves of the Greeks. And that's good too, the Pat Barker book.
Last question. It is from Kim, and she says that she too has a job heavily focused on writing along with editing her colleagues' work. Now she's been tasked with coaching new writers to improve their writing. Now, Mary, from your perspective, beyond having them simply review edits on their work, is there anything else you could recommend to help them improve?
Well, reading, read. That's the best advice that I can give to any writer who is trying to improve, is to read good things and to read them. I'm not an analytical reader, so I always read something. I read it for content. And as I said, I'm kind of naive that way, but that's only the first time. I think copy editing gave me the idea, because I didn't want to make mistakes or miss anything, of reading something twice. And the second time, I can see how it's done. I can see, the thing that I love best about, that I enjoy most in writing, is shaping a sentence, is getting those words in the best possible order in the sentence, and getting those sentences in the best possible order in the paragraph, and getting those paragraphs in the best possible order to get across whatever the larger idea is that you're going for. And it's been a kind of occupational hazard for me to delve into the minutia, because that's what copy editors do. So an editor is for me, my editor at Norton is a genius of an editor named Matt Weiland, and Matt is really good at seeing the big picture. So, a writer also shouldn't be afraid to get opinions, to show work and get some feedback on it, and answer difficult questions like, what are you trying to say? And of course, the most important thing is to be able to write in a way that brings the reader along, that compels the reader to keep writing, the reader to keep reading. Okay?
Thank you so much, Mary. This has been a delight. And thank you all so much for coming. The book, Mary Norris's book, is Greek to Me, Adventures of the Comma Queen. You can buy it from our website at northshire.com. Thank you all so much also for tuning in, and for all of the online orders that have really helped keep our store afloat. Also of note, we have just put on sale tickets for a couple of Northshire live events that are coming up. These will be ticketed events with book. That is going to be in late May. Frances Mays will be presenting her latest book, Always Italy, and in conversation with her co-author, Olivier Cohan. I think I messed up her co-author's name. But then we also have in June a special ticketed event with Chris Bojalian presenting his new book, The Red Lotus, and he'll be presenting in conversation with Rebecca Mackay. Thanks so much for coming. Again, the book is Greek to Me. It's Mary Norris. Thanks for coming to Northshire Live.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming. For